So you're not going to believe this, but we got to start all the way back in the late 90s. Back on June 28, 1999, Valve Software registered the domain halflife3.com. This was done at the same time that Valve registered Half-Life 2.com. And this was likely done because Valve had a contract with Sierra. Sierra was the publisher of pretty much everything Valve did up until Half-Life 2. In the original version of the contract, which has been public since the 2003 lawsuit regarding net cafes, Valve had been contracted to create not only Half-Life, but Prospero 1 and Prospero 2. Following the shipping and completion of Half-Life 1, it became apparent that Prospero wasn't going to happen. Early work on Half-Life 2 was already starting up, and everybody else was working on Team Fortress 2. Instead of shipping Half-Life and then 2 Prospero games, the contract likely changed over to ship 3 Half-Life games. Half-Life 3 and Half-Life 2 both had websites registered. Now, it should be stated that in order to fulfill these contractual obligations, Valve shipped Counter-Strike as Half-Life Counter-Strike at retail. It had nothing to do with the game, it was just called that so that it would satisfy the contractual obligations. But this is the seed that gave birth to the idea of Half-Life 3. However, we do have to skip ahead to June 13th, 2003. Gabe Newell is giving an interview about Half-Life 2 with a mod development team called Trepid. This interview was conducted by Jonathan Day and Jesse Davis from that team, where they asked, quote, "What was the most difficult challenge to overcome when developing Half-Life 2? Gabe Newell said, quote, "The length of the project. We've been working on Half-Life 2 for 5 years, and it's been a huge amount of work the whole time. It's just been hard to maintain your focus over that length of time. We've had some of our longtime playtesters going from being seniors in high school to being college graduates during the Half-Life 2 development. You know, we're going to recharge a bit on short, fun projects once Half-Life 2 goes out the door." With the bar set so high in Half-Life 2, and the now justified weight across the first one, can you even fathom what Half-Life 3 will encompass? Sure, we don't really have much trouble figuring out what we want to push next. It's usually more of a problem for us to postpone things. Is it possible that Half-Life 3 is soon to follow from the proverbial back burner? No. On August 7th, 2003, an Italian magazine called Game Center sent a few of their writers over to Seattle for a few days to preview Half-Life 2 and discuss the game with a few people at Valve. However, one of the few questions that they actually published was, "Half-Life 3 has already been announced. Are you thinking about it?" It has? What's in it? On March 18th, 2004, a Nordic gaming magazine called Game Reactor spent 3 days in the greater Seattle area, pretty much just at Valve Software. Through their time there, they felt confident enough to push the headline, quote, "Valve reveals Half-Life 3 world exclusive for Game Reactor." To quote them through a machine translation because it was originally written in a different language, quote, "In an interview with the company's CEO, Gabe Newell, it emerged that Valve had already begun to sketch guidelines and chip out ideas for a third game in the series," end quote. This was later debunked by Gabe Newell. Obviously, the hoaxes have been around since the beginning. A real famous one happens sometime in 2005. We don't have a specific date, but it's this image. This was created by an artist named Alistair McNally while at Electronic Arts as a pitch or showcase for what a quote-unquote next-gen Half-Life 2 would look like. McNally discusses the creation of the concept art with, quote, "This image was created to demonstrate to Valve and EA how Half-Life 2 would look if it were running on a next-gen console in high definition. The overall goal here was to try and keep the original design and construction rules for Half-Life 2 since the next-gen version would be built using existing tools and technologies. Since geometrically the fidelity of the world environment would not be increased significantly, I focused more on lighting and shaders. I modeled the environment and props in 3ds Max 7.0 and painted the textures in Photoshop CS2. Lighting is created using a radiosity solution, and the soft area shadows in the lighting is baked back into the texture so it can be easily recreated in real time. The colored tints around the windows and lights are done with semi-transparent color cards placed in the scene and oriented towards the camera," end quote. Now, on August 1st, 2005, and as reported by Computer and Video Games, or CVG, a Spanish event was held by Microsoft regarding the future of their next-generation hardware, the then upcoming Xbox 360. At this keynote presentation, a PowerPoint was shown. One of the slides attempted to visualize the technologies powering the upcoming hardware. Game engines, games, and their associated companies were listed as part of that technological flow. This presentation was written officially by an arm of Microsoft, and listed among these was Valve Software and Half-Life 3. Alright, so I've been using the FlexiSpot C7M chair for the last few months, and here's the deal. It's just solid. It's ergonomic, it's fully adjustable, and it's the most comfortable chair I've used long term. The back support is actually real, not just some gimmick that collapses after a few weeks. My posture's better, I'm not constantly shifting around, and after long editing or recording sessions, I'm not sore anymore. You can recline it, tilt the headrests, slide the seat, adjust the arms, everything you'd expect at this level, and it actually works the way it's supposed to. The seat's this latex foam blend that doesn't flatten out, and yeah, you can absolutely sit in this thing all day. I do. Gaming, editing, recording, it's just part of the setup now. If you want to check it out, there's a link in the description. Use my code and get $50 off the C7M. It's a limited time deal. And if you're on a limited budget, the FlexiSpot C7 or C5 chair also comes with a significant discount. Thanks to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this channel again and making sure I don't sit like a question mark anymore. Back to the video. So Half-Life 2 Aftermath is announced, and then it's quickly changed over to Half-Life 2 Episode 1. During the initial development of Episode 1, only Episode 1 and 2 were discussed in any official capacity. It wasn't until Episode 1 went gold, the announcement of which was made on May 24th, 2006, that Valve's own press release states that Episode 1 is, quote, the first in a trilogy of episodes that will conclude by Christmas of 2007, end quote. So Episode 1 comes out, and some interviews follow. For example, one on June 6, 2003, conducted by Eurogamer by Tom Bradwell, Gabe Newell and Eric Johnson are asked, why did you go for the episodic system?
The original Half-Life took us 2 years to develop. With a considerably larger team, Half-Life 2 took us 6 years. So we thought if we were going to continue our trend with Half-Life 3, we would basically ship after we had all retired.
So far you've announced 3 episodes. Is that all? Any more planned beyond that?
There are 3 that are in this arc. There are 3 that are worked out, and those are the ones that we have been talking about so far.
Why did you change the name from Aftermath? We liked that name.
I think that Aftermath was almost a temporary name. I always thought of it as Episode 1 through 3 because that's how we planned the products out. I think people thought we'd need a name for them, and Aftermath ended up being more confusing than helpful. Probably a better name for it would have been Half-Life 3 Episode 1. But these next 3 are what we're doing as our way of taking the next step forward, but Half-Life 2 was the name we used.
Clearly Episode 1 is very much about Alyx. Why such a big focus on her? And where does the G-Man fit into all of this?
The arc of the trio of episodes is also about the G-Man. He appears briefly in Episode 1, and we'll get more info on him later. If you think of Half-Life 1 as the G-Man trying to turn you into something that was useful to him, the transformation of the player into a hero, and then Half-Life 2 was about how he was using you, Half-Life 3, aka Episodes 1 to 3, is about the relationship with the G-Man and what happens when he loses control of you, when you're not available to him as a tool, and how he responds to that. And what are the consequences of that? Alyx and the relationship with her is a big focus in Episode 1, and the larger story about your evolving relationship with the G-Man is the text of the trio of episodes.
Presumably you play as Gordon Freeman for all the upcoming episodes?
Yes. You'll be Gordon Freeman for all 3 of them. In a sense, the core stuff, like Half-Life 2 and the episodes, you play as Gordon. And in expansion products, you tend to revisit issues and play as different people and see those events through their eyes. It's relatively unlikely that you'd play as one of these other characters as the main story is going forward. We'll save that for Gordon.
August 25th, 2006, Game Informer's then Billy Berghammer does an interview with Doug Lombardi. You mentioned in the original presentation that Portal will take place in the Half-Life universe. Will that connection be made in Portal or Episode 2? It happens when you're playing through Portal, and you will play as a new character that we haven't introduced yet that will have a role in Half-Life games in the future. That's interesting how you said that. Will this be a character that we might see in Episode 3? Perhaps. But if Episode 3 is the ending of the trilogy, but not ending Half-Life, just the trilogy. On November 1st, 2006, Valve gives a closed-door presentation to hardware vendors and game developers and called it Valve Hardware Day. Now, this was a long-form presentation and mixer where Valve demonstrated the enhancements that multi-core and multi-threaded processing would allow in video games. They showcase this through a purpose-built demo called the Source Particle Simulation. The build of this demo has since leaked, and two major things were shown, aside from massive amounts of particles being simulated all at once: NPC Blob and NPC Surface. Both of these have later been confirmed to have been developed for Episode 3. NPC Blob was showcased through a whole bunch of snarks, all coordinating together as one NPC, whereas NPC Surface is effectively Blobulator. It's this massive blob-like being that can separate into parts and then congeal back together. This was shown off years later in the documentary from Danny O'Dwyer. The footage you're seeing and the build itself has been fixed up and repacked by XJR9000 from the hl2-beta.ru forums. Link to all of that down below. So obviously at this point, the Orange Box has been announced. The public is excited that Team Fortress 2 has finally come out of development hell, and we are all seeing the future of Valve software. Episode 2 is getting closer and closer. On May 9th, 2007, PC Gamer does a whole spread on a preview specifically about Episode 2, and they specifically detail a lot of gameplay moments that they got to experience. During an interview, they asked about their own personal theory related to Episode 3, and I'm going to quote them entirely. In Episode 1, we got a glimpse of an Arctic base where Mossman was searching for the data packet, and Project Lead David Speyer confirms that we'll be seeing a bit more of that in Episode 2. Valve's coffee table book of the making of Half-Life 2, Raising the Bar, includes a detailed description of a chaotic battle in the Arctic, which was cut before it got made. It brought to mind something Valve said long ago about Half-Life 2's Citadel. They always want you to see where you're going to end up, a long time before you get there. You can see where I'm going with this. Valve were being typically coy about all the plot details, but I told them my theory anyway, that Episode 3 would be set at this Arctic base and feature that huge climactic battle described. I was expecting the usual, "we're not talking about that," but the chief PR man, Doug Lombardi, just smiled and said, "That would be exciting, wouldn't it?" May 17th, 2007, Eurogamer's Tom Bradwell does an interview with Doug Lombardi and gets a shockingly candid response about Episode 3. Quote, "Pre-production is definitely going, and it'll be ramping up rather quickly now that they're ramping down on Episode 2. There's a skeleton crew doing the work," he added, although their attention is being split between that and the ongoing development of Episode 2, which is nearing completion ahead of what Valve hopes will be an October release. Perhaps tellingly, though, in a separate discussion about moving the player towards the team's ultimate goal over the course of the Episodic trilogy, Episodic co-director David Speyer mentions that a lot of work had gone into, quote, "creating a natural progress of topography and climate." Will Episode 3 change the setting drastically, we asked? I don't think you'll head back to City 17, for sure. Not in Episode 3, anyway. Okay, so August 28th, 2007, Gabe Newell does another interview, this time with Kakizo. They ask, quote, "You've said that Portal exists in the Half-Life universe, and there are already some crossovers. Can you tell us about when we might learn more about the Aperture Science Center? Will it come into play within the current iteration of the Half-Life series?"
You will learn about it. Whether or not it shows up like in Episode 2 or a different vehicle, we'll definitely learn more. It's part of our universe. You can tell that when you play through it. There's a lot of affection at Valve for these characters, especially for Gladys, the computer voice.
So Episode 2 is all about learning a bit more, while Episode 3 will be a resolution to a lot of things. How much is going to be resolved by the end of the number 3? Is it all written already? Is the story done?
Yeah, the questions are more about how we tell story than what the plot is. So we think we're going to resolve a lot. But, it's hard to, how do you measure that? I think that people will feel a sense of closure on a bunch of things, as well as saying, "Oh darn it, now there's a bunch of more stuff." That's the challenge with serializing our releases. How to give people a sense that yes, things are moving forward, but still having things to find out about. But there should be a good sense that it wraps up a fair number of things.
So the Orange Box releases. It's the best thing Valve ever did. It is the most influential thing on my life. Portal, Team Fortress 2, and the ending of Episode 2. And a month later, in December of 2007, the Games for Windows magazine publishes a full front-page spread on Valve software. And they interview a whole bunch of different people at the company.
I've had about 1,000 emails from people who've purchased Orange Box. With Episode 1, we ended up with some 7,000. We read through them all. Everybody on the development team does. We get wacky requests. Somebody just asked for a picture of me holding up a sign that says, "Daniel Mortensen is my son." So I sent him a picture.
Well, that's the wrong quote. That's not important. Kinda. What is the current state of what you've dubbed Valve's episodic experiment?
Our customers now have two contrasting examples with Episode 1 and the Orange Box. We'll give them one more data point with Episode 3. Then they can say, "We liked episode 1," or "We liked episode 2," or 3 more. It'll give us a full framework to analyze.
If the orange box is super successful, is the message that we want episodes or that we want big boxes with a whole bunch of good games?
Well, it's still interesting data, right? We want to give people enough perspective so that they'll be able to say, make more boxes, but don't do that episode 3 thing again, or screw everything. What we want is more Portal. You know.
There's a lot more to Half-Life's story than who and what the G-Man is. But it seems that the longer those questions go unanswered, the less likely you'll be able to answer them to everyone's satisfaction.
We have some good answers. I totally recognize, though, that you can't become excessively cautious and fearful that the reason people are interested in what's happening is the mystery, because that just means you're avoiding the ongoing problem of telling new stories and creating new characters. I think people are worried. What happens if we kill off characters? I was just responding to an email from a fan who had this idea that somehow we would bring Eli Vance back. And I was like, no, he's dead. He really is dead. People die in this universe. It's not a kid's TV show where the cast of characters is static, and what can happen to them is constrained by the fact that customers are able to view the TV shows out of order, right? Which is a horrible constraint to put on TV writers. That's something we've never had to deal with.
Are you interested in producing more stories of Portal's sort?
The interesting thing about Portal is we know who the protagonist, Chell, is, and we'd already planned that character's part in something that occurs later. With Portal, we sort of opportunistically say, oh, she fits in here. This makes sense.
Are you confident you can resolve Half-Life's principal enigmas, especially the G-Man? David Spayer responds, the key is to answer a set of questions while asking new ones at the same time. It's not clear how concrete we want to be in the way that we address who the G-Man is and what he's all about. We're going to say things about his motivations and his origins, but how we answer these questions is all important. To tell it straightforward, that he's X and his motivation is Y, is flat and ultimately unsatisfying. But I think the answers are going to be really, really gratifying. You're 2 episodes into what you've called an episodic experiment. Are you getting good results? I'm very happy with the games that Valve is making. I think that a lot of the stuff I've seen in the press and on the forums focuses on the word episode and its implication for length and frequency of delivery. The biggest criticism has been about the latter, and we need to figure that out. The somewhat smaller scope of the product allowed us maximize quality.
That's how the magazine's written.
That goes for storytelling, too. We made major revisions, changed the story at the end, and then we were able to fold that change all the way back through to the beginning. Basically saying, well, we can build up to this conclusion here, here, and here. With something the size of Half-Life 2, that's a lot harder to do. Did you begin building Episode 3 before finishing Episode 2? Yeah, there was a period where the Episode 1 team leapfrogged ahead on Episode 3 pre-production. Later, we looked at the scope of Episode 2 and decided it was more valuable to take what was the Episode 3 team and move them on to all 3 games in the Orange Box. That was absolutely the right decision. So we laid some groundwork for Episode 3, but aren't necessarily locking ourselves into that. We want to give ourselves room to experiment, see how it plans out. Positive perceptions about AI almost always involve AI that lives long enough to demonstrate its abilities. Enemy in Halo's celebrated legendary difficulty level, for example, are cited as among the most intelligent in the genre. However, they also have more hit points. Have you thought much about introducing an ultra-hard mode to Half-Life? I'm interested in seeing what size of the audience the feature appeals to. Are we talking about a tiny cluster or a significant chunk of our players? We definitely understand that there's a strong correlation between dying and quitting. Maybe Episode 1's elevator scene involved qualitative factors. Say, people were dying because they didn't know what they needed to do in order to succeed, and they stopped playing. It's complicated. That said, we all agree that there's a lot of value in AIs that live long enough to demonstrate interesting behaviors. The Hunter is an experiment in that area. When you fight multiple Hunters at once, you have to change tactics. Empty one weapon, throw objects with the gravity gun, jump in the car. That seemed like a step in the right direction for our combat and our combat AI. Still, we want to take AI in an interesting direction. Directions that are different from a single, super tough intelligence. That's a teaser. What can you tell me? Well, we're experimenting. It's too early to talk about, and, there's no Episode 3 teaser at the end of Episode 2. We want to experiment with what exactly Episode 3 is yet. Plus, we wouldn't want to spoil the moment at the end of Episode 2 to jump into an action-packed teaser. would be jarring. Isn't Orange Box escalating expectations? If you launch the next episode by itself, we'll wonder where that year's Portal and TF2 are. We joke about that. If we have to up the ante for our next product, it's like 4 new games plus the back catalog. It's kind of scary. Every time we make things scary for ourselves as content creators, though, we end up doing something cooler than we originally intended. We'll keep going like this and see where it leads. A month later, December 21st, 2008. This image. The famous blue crowbar. Now, this was originally shared on the message boards for the Hidden Source, that old source mod. Remember that? Posted by a user called The Christ. The image itself was hosted on a website called Panther37, which is entirely empty on the Internet Archive. Here's the thing. This image was actually a piece of concept art created by Chris Thunning, an artist who had worked on games such as Diablo 3 and 4 and a bunch of other stuff. That said, it was actually made for a French sci-fi movie, Immortal 2004. The Half-Life bits, like the crowbar and the HUD, were just slapped on. For real, this is actually used in the actual film. And now, the leaks start. April 21st, 2008. The Source Engine SDK is updated to the Orange Box version of the engine. In the update of the SDK, 3 Episode 3 source code files, CPPs, were found. And according to a Valve employee, immediately after the finding was published to the Steam user forums, it was added by mistake. Quote, "They were leftover stuff that aren't used and no longer exist. They were included in the SDK by mistake." These 3 files, however, was NPC Combine Armored, NPC Weapon Scanner, and Weapon Proto 1. Not all of these were scrapped at this point. E3 2008, people are gearing up, and the ESA lists all the games that are going to be at the show on their website. Half-Life 2 Episode 3 is on the website. Valve immediately debunks it. July 10th, 2008. PC Gamer admits to running an Episode 3 concept art piece before anyone else, all the way back hidden in the November 2007 issue covering the Orange Box. There it is. This is the first time this piece of art is ever seen by the public, and the public ends up finding it through the Into the Pixel artwork contest from 2008. PC Gamer, trying to flex on everybody, showcases a second piece of concept art that they, quote, "were saving for a rainy day." Of course, all 3 pieces were found on the actual website for the Into the Pixel contest on October 13th, 2008. In another interview with Kikizo, Doug Lombardi discusses the then upcoming Left 4 Dead, but was also asked about Episode 3, which at this point isn't technically too late, but it has been about a year since the launch of the Orange Box. When are we going to start to hear about Episode 3? Because the gaps seem to be quite long based on the first couple of episodes. Yeah, the next time you play as Gordon will be longer than the distance between Half-Life 2 to Episode 1 and Episode 1 to Episode 2. Won't you announce or show anything on Episode 3 this year? We may at the very end of the year. What do you think about the distance between episodes, though? Is there a benefit to having a longer wait? I think our philosophy was that we spent 6 years on Half-Life 2 and upwards of $40 million, and basically 80% of the company ended up working on it for a good chunk of that time. And that was just too much. Nobody wanted to do that again. There was this trajectory in Half-Life 1 costing a lot less than that and taking 2 years or whatever it took. Half-Life 2 was 6 years and a lot more money. So if we were to keep going down that path, it was going to get more expensive and take even longer. And what we wanted was an alternative to that. We wanted to deliver games more quickly, and we didn't want to be taking the risk of $40 million or $50 million to make the thing. Because at that point, you're like, oh my god, we have to sell 2 million copies or else we're fucked. Right? So I think that we were successful in that it's been less than 4 years since Half-Life 2, and we've gotten 2 episodes out, each of them having new technologies, each of them had new gameplay. Arguably, Episode 2 had more gameplay than Episode 1, but I think we were successful in giving players more time with Freeman, more time with Alyx, giving them new experiences, telling them more story in a much quicker fashion. I mean, Episodic conjures up this notion of television where it comes once a week for 12 weeks or whatever, and so maybe there's a better word for what we're doing. You know what I mean? But I think the goal is to get away from that half a lifetime, mountains of money to produce the next thing. And we've succeeded in that. And maybe we could have chosen a better word to describe what it is we're doing. And I mean, to be truthful, games that aren't calling themselves episodes are kind of getting around the same length. So I think while we maybe didn't choose the right word, our intentions were, we were trying to be honest, and saying that we weren't giving you 15 plus hours that we gave you in Half-Life 2. We're giving you a little less, and we're going to give it to you at a more rapid pace, and we're going to move the price to be more according. A map pack originally shared on the 10.4 forums and possibly created by a user named Mix was released. This was an attempt to pass off basic maps as a very, very early build of Episode 3. In modern day, these maps are legendary. Like, everybody has seen these, right? June 11th, 2009, Doug Lombardi and Gabe Newell give an interview with G4, at this point about Left 4 Dead 2. G4 asks, quote, so is it safe to say that you have like 4 different projects in development right now? So you have Left 4 Dead 2, you have Team Fortress 2, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Portal 2 and then Episode 3.
I'm not going to talk about things that we're talking about Left 4 Dead 2 and Episode 3. As far as I know, that's all we're talking about publicly.
We're not talking about Episode 3 publicly.
Oh, well, I guess I'm not talking about Episode 3 publicly either. So what's your question? Yes, we have a lot of stuff that's going on. We have Steam. Steam makes a lot of work. We have these movie things to make. They take a lot of work.
Side note, he's talking about Source Filmmaker shorts, not full-length movies. I only have one last question, maybe a follow-up if you allow it. The first time I interviewed you was about Episode 1. We talked about Episode 2 and episodic content. It was very ambitious because you were saying that you want to come out with the first episode in this amount of time, the second episode and blah, blah, blah. And granted, it's always when it's done, and things always get pushed out. But now, looking back even though you're not talking about Episode 3 today, are you still happy you did it episodically? Or would you have, because it's taken kind of the same amount of time that Half-Life 2 took to get all 3 episodes out?
Oh, no. Half-Life 2 took 5 years?
Well, we're working on 3.5 years now.
Yes, but we shipped twice, right? We've been able to take these steps forward in technology. Left 4 Dead couldn't have shipped without Episode 1 and 2, right? That puts us in a position, to be able to do Portal and Team Fortress 2. And all of these products were enabled by moving to these shorter development cycles. So yeah,
You don't regret it?
I want to make sure that I don't sound like I'm dismissing user issues, right? I get a ton of email every day saying, why aren't you talking about Episode 3? There are very good reasons why we're not talking about Episode 3, which I can't talk about yet, but I will. So there's this frustration there, and I'm not somehow going to say that that's not legitimate or length isn't a concern or regularity. The speed with which these updates are coming out, people say, hey, these episodes are supposed to be shorter and you take 25 years to ship each one. So I don't want to somehow dismiss those or sort of throw them under, but I think we're in much better shape than would have been in terms of our ability to move stuff, technology, products, faster forward by changing how, being different than, there was Half-Life 2 and then there was post Half-Life 2 in terms of how we're approaching these things. And I think that we're overall pretty happy without somehow dismissing the legitimate complaints that people should have towards us.
Do you think we'll find out new details about Episode 3 by the end of the year?
Just so you know, the thing to me, that feels right is the rhythm that Robin and his team are operating with. It's like watching the reaction of that community, watching their ability to respond, looking at the quality of the work they're getting with the length of those development cycles. They're having a great time. And I think it shows on the other side, right? I mean, they were just giggling so hard when they were changing the buttons in the movies to say leak video. Do you remember the big screen with all the buttons? And they were like, we have to put leak video into that thing before we release it. They were just like cackling away. What should have been like pretty demoralizing and stressful for them was like, oh, this is no big deal. So yeah, people get the idea.
It's pretty clear now that Episode 3 had already been shelved at this point.
Forget about Freeman! We are cutting our losses and pulling out!
Joystick interviews Doug Lombardi, July 4th, 2009. First things first, where's Half-Life 2 Episode 3? Ha! Stay tuned, no news on that today. And thus the caginess begins. August 6th, 2009, Gabe Newell gives a presentation to a large group of hearing-impaired individuals to discuss the ideas of technology that he was interested in relation to sign language and the hearing-impaired in video games.
I'm a big fan of Dog and Alyx communicating through sign language. I'm curious what you think. So, the idea is that before Alyx met Gordon Freeman, this is only for people who understand Half-Life, that she had a crush on someone who was hearing impaired. So she taught Dog how to sign so she could practice. And even though she's something happened. Maybe that person is off fighting the Combine someplace else. But that's why she and Dog would start signing with each other when they wanted to communicate without making noise or communicate without other people knowing. So that's an idea of adding, starting to bring signing into our games and give us the excuse to build the technology for signing.
August 12th, 2009, the Steamcast did an interview with Gabe Newell and just straight up asked about Episode 3.
I think that what's going on, and we're sort of, always experimenting. We're always trying out different kinds of things, and that has positive as well as negative consequences for ourselves and for the community. So if you look at our different products, we're trying out these different rhythms. Right now, Team Fortress 2 has this, every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks, we're going to do a release. And we see what people like and what people don't like. With Left 4 Dead, we did the first release November of last year, and now we're going to do a second release a year later. So it's a lot slower than the Team Fortress release schedule. But for some people, they're upset, because that it's so much faster than, say, the release schedule between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. Right now, the Half-Life 2 episodes themselves are on a third sort of rhythm. So, there's just this big difference between this old method where everybody knew exactly the right way to release their projects, and today, where we're sort of wanting to make a bunch of experiments and try a bunch of things out, some of which will work well for people and for us, and some of which won't. Yeah. And so, Ep3 is sort of, a victim of our willingness to experiment. But as soon as we have stuff that we're ready to talk about Ep3, we will.
January 18th, 2010. Website Cinema Blend teases an upcoming front-page story from Game Informer with Valve Software and a big announcement. Game Informer seemingly confirms no Half-Life in 2010. Of course, this cover story was the announcement of Portal 2. March 9th, 2010. This piece of concept art starts being shared around as another possible leaked piece of art for Episode 3. Nope. This one is from an independent South Korean concept artist and has nothing to do with Half-Life. March 2010, Edge Magazine does a retrospective with Gabe Newell and Valve Software, specifically focused almost entirely on Half-Life 2 and the effects that it's had on the industry, as Edge had recently named it the game of the decade. There was one quote that is important to remember. Did Valve always intend its sequels to mature with the game's audience? Surprisingly not. According to Newell, quote, "That isn't something we think about except as part of each project needing to respect the fact that simply repeating the past isn't going to have the same impact now as it did then. I feel we've gotten away from genuinely scaring the player more than I'd like, and it's something we can think about, in addition to broadening the emotional palette we can draw on. And now, as future players of Episode 3 start having families and hitting middle age, what horrifies them more than anything else? The death of their children, the fading of their own abilities." That was 15 years ago he said that. That was the last time Valve ever said the name Episode 3 publicly. Okay, this is going to take a moment to explain. In June of 2010, it was already known, previously announced, that Valve was going to have an event at the same time E3 was going on at the Regal Theater. This event was technically open to the public, although it was difficult to get in. The thing is, on June 2nd, only 2 weeks before this event was to take place, it was announced that it was canceled and would be replaced by a surprise. This announcement was made in character. "Dear
subject name here.
Aperture Science is pleased to inform you that we have partnered with Valve to announce the gala cancellation of the June 14th Portal 2 event at the Regal Theater. The event will be replaced by a surprise, and even though the cancellation of the event certainly counts as a surprise, we are pleased to further announce that the cancellation of the event is not the surprise. However, per international treaties regarding the definition of the word surprise, of which both Aperture Science and Valve are signatories, the time, date, and content of the actual surprise will only be available as you experience the surprise. If you'd like to ask fruitless questions about the E3 Portal 2 surprise, or more fruitfully, schedule an appointment to attend a Portal 2 screening at the Valve booth during E3. Please contact Valve's special envoy to surprises, Doug Lombardi. Thank you for the... P.S. The surprising record scratch is also not the surprise. So, okay, they cancel their event, and there's a surprise. What's the first thing the internet does? It's Half-Life. There's a new Half-Life game. That's the surprise. It's Half-Life. Portal 2's already announced, but it's Half-Life. And people start sharing around this image that was apparently from a pamphlet. People think, oh, it might be real because when they ported a bunch of Valve games to Macintosh computers, this was an image they used as part of the promotional campaign, and it looks kind of similar, when in reality this is actually an inverted image of what the actual pamphlet would have looked like. And also, VG247 reports on a rumor that the surprise isn't Half-Life directly, but it's Source 2. And then Gabe Newell just debunks it all. Half-Life2.net, which later became ValveTime.net, just emailed him, and Gabe was like, no, just one word. No. Okay, so July 21st, 2010, Alien Swarm just launched. Alien Swarm came with tools, and within the Alien Swarm tools was something called Blob. Of course, this is Blobulator. It was a cut enemy from episode 3, but there were info nodes, which are specifically put into maps to allow AI, NPCs, that kind of thing, to navigate around the levels in Source Engine, and one of the things was Blob. People were speculating on what that meant. Episode 3 is going to have some blobs. Years later, snow textures from episode 3 were also found. These were always known about, but it wasn't until only a few months ago that people realized these are from episode 3. August 5th, 2010. CVG interviews Doug Lombardi about Portal 2 and its PS3 functionality. Lombardi, in the interview, says, quote, "We hate to make you wait, but we have no announcements regarding Mr. Freeman or his ongoing adventures at this time." September 15th, 2010. Gabe Newell gives an interview with PC Gamer with a focus on piracy. However, the question was asked. "Last time I was at your old office, on the whiteboard there was a pros and cons analysis of another weapon versus the gravity gun, something called the weaponizer. Was that an episode 3 thing?"
No. It was an internal design experiment that we were doing, which hasn't seen the light of day.
Eric Johnson chimes in, "That must have been a long time ago. That must have been during our direct design experiments. Is there some sort of big surprise in episode 3? Next question. Nothing at all? I have to ask.
I understand, and I have to not say anything.
Every now and then you guys give a hint of something,
And then he yells at me.
so I tend to sit in and just cut it off. Here's the fun fact about it. This guy was right. He was not supposed to see that. The weaponizer did not evolve from the direct design experiments. It was something from Half-Life 2 Episode 3. In fact, in the gameplay footage that was showcased in the documentary, for a few seconds this is seen. That's the weaponizer. Exactly how PC Gamer was able to see that whiteboard is insane. February 21st, 2011, the Australian News.com website gives a phone interview with the Portal 2 writing team, being Eric Wolpaw, Jay Pinkerton, and Chet Falasek. They ask, when is Half-Life 2 Episode 3 coming out?
We're not prepared to talk about that at the moment. Nice try. It's a nice try.
Is it coming out?
What, huh? We can't hear you. You're breaking up.
And then they all laugh.
So when you're thinking about games, you sort of want to think about how characters collide. You know, in their current forms, Chell and Gordon are very similar characters in terms of the phenomenology of experience. So that obviously isn't what people are thinking. Having these people coexist at the same time in the same place, that's obviously something that's part of the reason that Portal and Half-Life are in the same universe as we see opportunities there. How people would respond to those people not being the player themselves, but in fact being characters in the world, that would be a pretty interesting challenge for us. You know, and it's up to us as designers and as storytellers to think how that would work. But right now, they're actually the player. So having you encounter yourself is obviously not what people are thinking of when they think of Chell. Actually, I'm curious how Chell and Alyx would get along. I mean, given how I think about those two characters and what it would mean in these worlds, what would happen if those two characters encountered each other? Because I don't think they'd get along at first.
I also like the idea of Breen running into Gladys, because I think that would actually be kind of hysterical. I think that a lot of that stuff would write itself.
Yeah.
Just because there would be an edge to their interactions.
So this is the defining moment. May 9th, 2011. Gabe Newell does an interview with Develop, a game development magazine. And he straight up states the episodic model failed. 2 episodes later, that model has been completely replaced, Newell says. Everything Valve designs and makes today is built under the creed of the connected age, as entertainment as a service. Games will no longer be cut into slices, he says, but instead will become their own platforms that Valve can continually evolve and update through Steam.
We went through the episodic phase, and now we're going towards shorter and shorter cycles. With episodes, I think we accelerated the model and shorted development cycles with it. If you look at Team Fortress 2, that's what we now think is the best model for what we've been doing. Our updates and release model keeps on getting shorter and shorter.
On May 14th, 2011, the Portal 2 SDK kind of ships. It was given out in piecemeal, it was given out in beta, it was a slow rollout. But initially, Combine Advisor roaming. This was a leftover from Episode 3 where you had the boss fight with a Combine Advisor. That's the thing that kills Eli. And you had a big boss battle, and this was some of the code specifically for that boss monster. It was left in the code by accident, another leak. But remember, at this point, Episode 3 was done. They had not touched it for a while. They just shipped Portal 2. It's funny though, because only a few days later, May 18th, 2011, this gets posted on r/gaming, and as far as I know, this is the inception of that joke. So later that month, also in May, people start really picking apart the files of Portal 2, and a whole bunch of animations from Magnuson, the guy at the end of Episode 2, were just in there. For the longest time, these were thought to be from Episode 3. I'm putting them here to tell you that they were actually for F-Stop, the canceled first version of Portal 2. Okay, June 22nd, 2011, Gabe Newell gives a keynote speech at a conference called Gamers for Change. Somebody asked the question, and Gabe Newell said,
"If you know enough to ask the question, you know enough what the answer is."
August 11th, 2011, the protest. 2 people protest outside Valve's offices asking for Half-Life 3. Gabe Newell comes out, thinks it's funny, invites them in, and lets them playtest, drumroll, Dota 2. So it's at this point that Dota 2 is being shared around in a similar fashion to how Deadlock is being shared around now. It's an internal playtest that's slowly being invited to more and more people. But on September 19th, 2011, an incomplete client build of Dota 2 was being shared around on the internet, and somebody data mined it. Episode 3 weapons were found. The ice gun, the previously mentioned weaponizer with different modes for concrete, liquid, and metal, and a flamethrower. September 21st, 2011, somebody asks Gabe Newell if they like haikus and if Episode 3 is coming soon. Gabe Newell said,
"Haikus are neato. They have a rigid structure. Episode 3 ships in."
This means nothing. So it's also at this point that Counter-Strike Global Offensive is entering like a closed beta phase, and Chet Falisak is heavily involved in the promotion of the game. In an interview by Now Gamer, Chet is asked about the code that was found in the Dota 2 client. Chet said, "Anything people get out of that rumor, they shouldn't take it to mean anything. I mean, I guarantee that if you went into the original Half-Life source code now, you'd probably find mentions of unrelated stuff labeled HL3 there already. It's just the way it happens." That's technically true. Half-Life save files at one point were saved as .hl1, .hl2, .hl3, .hl4, etc. However, this wasn't a rumor, this was a data mined leak from a real piece of Valve software. October 21st, 2011. Remember this? God, I'm old. And by the way, sometime in October of 2011, Valve artist Matt Charlesworth uploads a 3D sculpt of a man. It's just called Old Man. Yeah, so this was the G-Man for Episode 3. Old Man. December 1st, 2011. Remember this? Mark Laidlaw was asked about it. He said, quote, "I can confirm the existence of a shirt. Other than that, I couldn't tell you." On December 9th, 2011, an anonymous voice actor claims to have done work for Episode 3. Now, this is actually unconfirmed. It's totally possible that some people did voice work for Episode 3. However, John Patrick Laurie, the voice of the Sniper from Team Fortress 2, the male citizens from Half-Life 2, says, quote, "No Half-Life 3 stuff yet. Haven't heard anything. Well, while we're working on a game, it's proprietary and we're not supposed to say anything. Dota 2 is already kind of out there, so Valve folks told us it was okay to tell people. But I can tell you this, I wouldn't lie to you and say I wasn't working on a project if I was. I simply wouldn't say anything, or tell you that I couldn't say anything. Ellen and I haven't heard anything about a new Half-Life episode. Wish I had better news for you. I'd love to do another episode. December 22nd, 2011, the Spike TV Game Awards awards Wheatley as Character of the Year. As part of the acceptance speech, Valve submits a very short source filmmaker animation with Stephen Merchant reprising the role for a very short period of time. Because Portal 2 was announced through an ARG, people immediately started looking for references to possibly send people on a goose chase for another ARG. And it's around this time that a couple of things happen. One, the individuals from that Steamcast podcast claim that they were told to start teasing a future Half-Life thing. 2, a fake website called Black Aperture, which led to some hints related to the number 3, was made at the same time people were trying to find hints within the Spike TV Game Awards short, just to lead people down a false path. This was all just a hoax. So on January 4th, 2012, Counter-Strike Global Offensive goes into a more open beta, and there are just a whole bunch of Half-Life references all over the art, which of course people think meant some kind of future release, including me. I thought that too. February 19th, 2012, Gabe Newell does an interview with Penny Arcade, specifically about wearable computing. They ask, quote, "Now we're talking about things like wearable computers and biofeedback, and we've touched on Steam a little bit, but there's millions of people out there who are gnawing their teeth when they read this because they want to play Episode 3 or Left 4 Dead 3. Is there ever tension between all the different things that Valve is interested in doing?"
Oh, absolutely. We're acutely aware of how much we annoy our fans, and it's pretty frustrating to us when we put them in that situation. We try to go as fast as we can, and we try to pick the things that are going to be the most valuable to our customers, and if there's some magic way we can get more done in a day, we'd love to hear about it. But we recognize that it's been a long time, whereas we have so many games that people really love. Counter-Strike, Half-Life, Portal, Left 4 Dead, not a whole lot of Ricochet enthusiasts out there. And at the same time, we want to be making sure that those games and those stories and those characters are moving forward while also making sure that we don't just get into terminal sequelitis. But we've always, part of the reason that we've backed off talking so much about what was happening in the future is that when we've done that in the past, with Half-Life 1, it was a year after we originally said it would be. Half-Life 2, basically, if you go and read the forum posts, apparently took us 50 or 60 years to get done. So we're trying to be careful not to get people too excited and then have to disappoint them. So we're sort of reacting in the other direction and saying, okay, well, let's have things a little more baked before we start getting people all excited about it.
April Fool's Day, guess what that means? April 13th, 2012, this legendary question from the 7-Day Cooldown podcast.
My final question, and the question in the back of all your fans' minds, and everyone has been waiting to ask you for a long time. When can we expect the release of Ricochet 2?
In terms of Ricochet 2, we always have this problem that when we talk about things too far in advance, we end up changing our minds as we're going through and developing stuff. So as we're thinking through the giant story arc, which is Ricochet 2, you might get to a point where you're saying something is surprising us in a positive way and something is surprising us in a negative way. We'd like to be super transparent about the future of Ricochet 2. The twists and turns that we're going through would probably drive people more crazy than just being silent about it.
You were talking a little bit about the horizontal structure, the fact that people move from project to project. With Ricochet 2, have you had people moving off that project and that's kind of slowed down that development cycle, or?
No. Everybody who is working on Ricochet 2 continues to work on Ricochet 2.
A week later, April 21st, 2012, the Valve Employee Handbook leaks. Okay, so this was bullshit. Valve didn't have a handbook before this. Valve doesn't have a handbook now. This was written by a few specific people internally as what's called developer marketing, getting the word out there about how cool it is to work at the company just to get them to apply. This handbook in its entirety was also given as a keynote address by Greg Coomer, the alleged author of this handbook. And of course, there's Half-Life 3 jokes throughout it. But the crazy thing about it, right, is that not even a year later, the first round of massive layoffs happened at Valve Software.
It was the weirdest layoff I've ever seen in my life. I've been on both sides of the fence before at previous companies. But I show up to work everyone knows that there's this big layoff. And I found out that our mechanical engineer was getting laid off, and I was pissed off. And I come charging into the hardware lab, and they're like, Jerry, you're fired too. I'm like, how could this be? Gabe just stood me up at the Valve Hawaii picnic. He literally had me stand up and say I was the most valuable hire that they've ever made at Valve. It was like unbelievable that, you know, my head was on the chopping block. They were one by one pulling us into like these rooms and letting us go. And so I had to sit there for like 5 hours waiting to be let go. And I knew Valve has this rule, like if you hire someone in and they don't work out, you let them go. Mm-hmm. Gabe was the one to let me go. I can't believe you're doing this. Oh my God, I so bought into what you wanted me to do. Oh. Conversation went all over the place. The stupid lawyer was like, you know, trying to tell me my rights or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I ignored it.
May 31st, 2012, the Breen Grub Twitter account opens. This is technically fan fiction written by Mark Laidlaw from the perspective of Dr. Wallace Breen as a Combine advisor after his body had been assimilated into the Combine. And it starts and ends in very strange places. We're not going to go over it all here. I recommend it. Link down below. June 27th, 2012. Valve Artist uploads a whole bunch of Episode 3 concept art to their own personal Picasa account as portfolio in 2008. It sat there for 4 years before anybody found it. It was first found by a small gaming group on Facebook, and then Valve Time picked up on it, and the art was everywhere. This artist almost immediately scrubbed it from their portfolio. August 11th, 2012, the entirety of the source code for Source 2007 leaks. And it has all the orange box stuff we talked about prior, but the full files. So like Weapon Proto 1, Armored Combine, Weapon Scanner, the full files are there. 8 years ago, myself and a mod team got them all working in a mod that we did called Half-Life 2 Aftermath, link down below. February 18th, 2013, on a short-lived website called ValveLeakware.com, the FGD files for Episode 3 and Stars of Blood were leaked. FGD files, by the way, are what define entities within the game editor. You can have everything in the code, but you won't be able to use anything without a file that actually defines its behavior. And this was the definition file for Episode 3, and it showed a lot of information about the then canceled video game. It was speculated that these files came from an internal build of Source Filmmaker that had somehow made the rounds. However, all known leaked builds of Source Filmmaker are now just kind of archived, and they weren't there. It's not currently known exactly where this came from. Okay, it's April Fool's Day again. June 19th, 2013, Valve's internal mailing list called JIRA, which is specifically there in order to group people together on projects for efficiency and communication, and also bug fixing, I guess, was left open to the public for a short period of time. And in it, there was an Episode 3 group, there was an Episode 3 movie group, and then there was a Half-Life 3 group with 43 members. The Episode 3 movie group, by the way, is not, oh, they're going to finish the trilogy with a movie. No, they were working on a Source Filmmaker short. It should be stated that the JIRA group that is listed here, the Half-Life 3 thing, is the procedural generation Half-Life 3 that was discussed in the final hours. June 27th, 2013, Surgeon Simulator releases a Team Fortress 2 themed DLC themed around the Source Filmmaker short Meet the Medic. Upon completing it, an ARG appeared to start. Now, this ARG was done by the developers, not Valve Software. However, the developers didn't help, and people really thought this was pointing towards Half-Life 3 yet again. In August of 2013, John Patrick Laurie is back at it again, responding to comments on his blog. Sorry, I'm afraid that the opposite is true. Half-Life 3 is not being worked on at this time as far as I know. As far as I know, they are not developing Half-Life 3 now for several reasons. Among them, the mocap issue. Sorry for any confusion. What they might decide to do in the future depends on a lot of different factors. I hope they do, personally, but it has to make sense for them. Here's the biggest challenges with bringing out Half-Life 3. The big thing now with first-person shooters is motion capture, or mocap. One of the great things about Half-Life 2 is that all the characters that you meet actually look at you when they talk to you, no matter where you go or stand. With mocap, you can't do that, at least not yet. Once you film the actor doing something and capture that motion, that's what the character is going to do. This works great in movies, but when you make something interactive, it gets way less interactive with mocap. So that's one thing that they're working on. Still not definite, but I hope it helps you understand at least one of the reasons why they haven't brought out Half-Life 3 yet. So John actually comes out, gives a comment to Computer and Video Games, or CVG, and says that he misspoke and should not have been commenting on that. Quote, "My comments just seemed to cause a whole bunch of confusion, and when I tried to minimize the confusion, I misspoke and caused a whole bunch more confusion. The most important thing to know about voice actors is that we're the last to know anything. We don't find out about a project until we get hired to do voices for it." And that's a really good point, Mr. Laurie, because at this point, Half-Life 3 was in development. You might not remember this one. A trademark for Half-Life 3 and Portal 3 were filed in Europe, reportedly by Valve. 4 days later, Valve confirms that they're fake. But this was huge news at the time. October 2nd, Valve's internal mailing list, the JIRA thing, is opened again. It leaks again, and we get to see progress. So the last time we saw it, it was in June. Now it's October, and Half-Life 3's project has grown in size and split up into different groups, being art, audio, and a core team. When these different subgroups are formed, the game is in hard, legitimate development. Didn't last, though. January 10th, 2014, Rock Paper Shotgun gives an interview with Jan-Peter Ewert about Steam OS. Rock Paper Shotgun asks the question, quote, "Again, though, what about reactions to things like Half-Life? A third episode of which you told them to expect years ago, and Dire Tide, and even your recent round of layoffs. People clearly care, and they get upset when they're rewarded with total silence. It gives a general impression that Valve is listening, except you're really not. It makes the proposition of offering feedback less appealing." Jan Peter says, quote, "Well, I think those are different things. When it comes to people, we will not discuss them. We will not stand in their way or air their dirty laundry. When it comes to hardware or software, I think we do talk to our community. We read our forums and we post in our forums. So, should we have a big PR announcement around everything? We don't have a huge PR department. Everyone at Valve deals with issues individually as they come up. Whether it's one of us reading a blog post, knowing he's working on that, and answering a forum post, or people just doubling down or finishing something in reaction to a said blog post, it's obvious we're always trying to make the right choice," end quote. March 5th, 2014, Gabe Newell gives an AMA.
When we announced our products years in advance in the past, and then were really late delivering them, it was really painful for both us and the community. We'd rather not repeat that.
May 23rd, 2014. Co-creator of Counter-Strike Min Lee, who is currently trying to promote his game Tactical Intervention, which is spiritually Counter-Strike 2, was asked about anything happening at Valve Software, if he knows anything about anything, and he answered. So apparently this was on a Twitch stream. I, for the life of me, could not find this clip, but the quotes have been written down all over the internet. I pulled the quotes from a PC Gamer article. They were everywhere. Min Lee said, quote, "But yeah, I guess I could say I did see something that looked kinda like the Half-Life universe. It wouldn't surprise anyone if I said they're doing it. They're working on it. Yeah, so to go out on a limb, I'd say I did see some concept art for Half-Life 3. Dota 2 is being ported to Source 2 in 2015. Early versions of its toolset were being passed around. Everybody lost their mind that it was possible to set these tools in a Half-Life 3 developer mode. This is just how Valve's tools work. You set the game you're working on and it will change some parameters of those tools. But a Half-Life 3 project codename is being confirmed here. So this image was supposedly shared around and then posted on a subreddit with the request of the user to debunk it. This was sent to an unnamed journalist with a description of what all of the games would be. What's crazy is they predicted what Counter-Strike 2 would end up becoming with Zeus skins and the skins carrying over to the new game. But for Half-Life 3, they said, quote, "Half-Life 3 is the end to the franchise. It will be split into 2 parts, both being $30, eventually ending as a $60 package," end quote. April Fools again. Okay, so around August, the stirring of something crazy starts to happen. At this point, Half-Life 3 has been canceled. And on 4chan, a model of dog starts to leak in chunks. The user cut them all up into like a jigsaw puzzle and slowly leaked each piece over time. This is the model of dog. This model of dog was actually found in a piece of software called the Steam VR Performance Test Bench, software that was later made public the following year. However, the way Steam works is if you have an ID, you can download earlier versions of a piece of software. And this early version of the Test Bench demo was filled with development assets from a bunch of other games, predominantly Left 4 Dead 3, but also Half-Life 3, including this model of dog and a whole bunch of scripting files. Only a few months later, the HL3TXT leak happens. In an update to Dota 2, a couple of just plain text files leaked. These are effectively Source 2's versions of those FGD files, definitions of different entities that the game engine is meant to use. Part of this was NPC AI behavior, specifically for quests and procedural generation. You see, what had happened was the game was canceled. Everybody was demoralized, and what they were working on, they still wanted to get feedback from, because usually these experiments get feedback by shipping something. And since over 2.5 years of development had been put in on this project, these files describing what they were working on leaked. And reportedly, they were leaked in order to gather information on the ideas. On December 6th, 2015, SteamDB updates how they check for unreleased games, and found a whole bunch of unreleased games on Steam's backend, including something called Half-Life 3, except it didn't have the hyphen between half and life, and it had nothing to do with Valve. Another hoax. December 22nd, 2015, does anybody remember the Steam Winter Sale ARG? I do. Do you remember how the ARG led to this tiny lambda being found? I do. I woke my girlfriend, who is now my wife, up to tell her that I think Half-Life 3 is about to get announced. Oh boy. January 11th, 2016, the moderators of r/Half-Life state that they were able to verify the claims of an individual claiming to be a Valve employee and info dumping on Half-Life 3. Yeah, this guy was lying almost entirely. I don't know what the moderators were talking about, and of course this went everywhere. May 4th, 2016, the lab releases. There's Half-Life music as the loading screen. Wouldn't be important if it wasn't for the fact that a cut thing from the lab turned into Half-Life Alyx. I started having communications with an individual that was claiming to be a Valve employee that went by the name of Cephalon. This individual gave me so much information and also the post-human art. It's still up for interpretation whether or not this was a legitimate conversation with a whistleblower or not. January 17th, 2017, Game Informer runs an article about a whole bunch of stuff related to Half-Life 3 and claims that they, through sources, were able to gather information on previous iterations of the title, including an RPG and a full-motion video game. None of these things have ever been confirmed to be true in the last 8 years. On February 13th, 2017, Valve conducts their first press roundtable. Instead of going to events to find the press, they bring the press to them. I was there. I think that's going to be the last time Valve ever officially. Anywho, at the roundtable, I ask the question, but I ask it mentioning that in a screenshot of an individual playtesting the lab, on the monitor, there's an icon that's listed as VR3 with the Half-Life logo. This, of course, was an early build of Half-Life Alyx, but when pressed on the matter, Gabe Newell says that they have a bunch of childish employees that wear Half-Life 3 t-shirts around.
Some of the more childish members of our company have worn Half-Life 3 t-shirts to GDC.
Oh, I'm aware.
So, March 23rd, 2017, a user leaks all of the maps that are currently on the developer repository for Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Episode 2. In these are a bunch of files that were later found to be from the development of Episode 3 and also Half-Life 3 and an unreleased spin-off specifically of Alyx and Dog gathering resources. August 24th, 2017, Epistle 3. So following the publication of Epistle 3, Mark Laidlaw takes to Twitter and answers so many questions. September 2nd, 2017, longtime Valve composer Mike Muraski gives a speech at the Indian Institute of Technology. I'm only bringing this up because right at the start of the speech, saying, just watch.
I'm gonna count to 3. Raise your hand again. Everybody raise your hand. I'm gonna count to 3, and when I say 3, you say, when is Half-Life 3? Okay? All right? Ready? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3.
August 21st, 2018, Gabe Newell records a Mega Kills pack for Dota 2 and makes this joke.
More than 2 kills, but less than 4 kills.
June 28th, 2019, at the release event for the Valve Index, Gabe Newell makes another 3 joke.
So Half-Life led to Half-Life 2. Source led to Source 2. The experiments we did with Team Fortress 2 were what enabled us to build Dota. Artifact is the reason that we're able to do Underlords. And so, maybe someday the number 2 will lead us to that shiny integer glowing on the mountain. We'll just have to see.
February 22nd, 2020, Half-Life Alyx has been announced, and Mike Shapiro, the voice actor for Barney and the G-Man, goes on an episode of Boundary Break, and at the end of the video says,
I'm pretty excited about a certain Valve title releasing very soon, and then later in 2020, there's a different big surprise coming that folks may be keen to learn about, so stay tuned for that blast from the past.
Yeah, we still don't know what that's about. Half-Life Alyx comes out on the 23rd of March, 2020, and in it, a bunch of stuff from the canceled version of Half-Life 3 was data mined, including spy grenades and zip lines, things that were outlined in the original HL3.txt leak. So now Half-Life Alyx is out. Many interviews of a very different, very candid Valve software were released. For example, one of the original Valve employees, level designer Dario Casali, told IGN, quote, "When we put Half-Life 2 out, of course, it was a really long time. That's 6 years, and we were developing the source engine alongside the game design." IGN continues with, they had to throw out a lot of the work they had already done on Half-Life 2 as they experimented with what source engine could do, played around with the physics system, and tried to push the limits of the new tech. Dario continues, quote, "I think our main takeaway from it is get some stable technology and then build a game on top of it. After working on Half-Life 2 for 6 years, we decided we didn't want to go dark for so long. That's why we started doing the episodes where we thought, well, we have stable technology now, we understand the characters, we understand the story, we have most of the mechanics. Let's just bite off little chunks and then release it more often." We think players are going to prefer that from waiting 6 years and going through however many delays we went through. We didn't want to make the same Half-Life 2 mistake again, of working on Source 2 and the next Half-Life game at the same time, because that created a lot of pain the first time we tried to do that. An interview for Polygon with Robin Walker, published the same day, I will say there's a lot of affection for the universe. We really liked making this game. It was a real breath of fresh air to build a game like this again after working for years on service, sort of marathons instead of things you know are going to end. We ended the game in the way you always end the game as a game developer, which is that you end when you feel like now you really know how to make this game. I'd like to believe that we're as good as we've ever been at building Half-Life at this point, and I hope we continue to make some more. I don't think there's going to be another 13-year wait, and if there is, I probably won't be working on it. I'm too old for that. On April 10th, 2020, only a few weeks after Half-Life Alyx came out, Eric Wolpaw and Jay Pinkerton gave an interview to Polygon, where they said, quote, "I think we'd be frustrated too," Wolpaw said, candidly. "We did it this once. It was interesting. It feels like it worked. I'm super relieved that we pulled it off, apparently. And yeah, the next thing, I would just like to keep going forward." I mean, again, this is me talking personally, not intuitions, but, it feels like we're in a nice middle ground between not being painted into a corner, but not having a giant blank page problem either, Jay Pinkerton said. On July 9th of 2020, Jeff Keighley releases the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, which confirms that Half-Life 3 was in production around 2015. Episode 3 ended production around the time of shipping Left 4 Dead. The general consensus was that the team was excited. Things started moving. In an update to Dota 2 pushed on March 21st, 2021, almost a year to the day following the release of Half-Life Alyx, a prototype codename, HLX, started appearing specifically here within demo file parameters. Now, this is around when we can assume the project started production, and based on how it appeared, it started off by building off of the engine work first started by Half-Life Alyx. In September of 2021, attempts were made by the community to reverse engineer Half-Life 3 through the many sources of code that existed within the public for years, from Half-Life Alyx, Dota 2, to Underlords, all holding some baseline code within the compiled binaries, however not being outlined in any scripting files to allow for that code to be called in a playable state. The work on this was promising, but did not see the project to conclusion. It did, however, shed light on exactly what the 2015 Source 2 build of Half-Life 3 was meant to look like, mechanically speaking. On August 8th, 2022, the Steam Deck launches in Asian territories, and an interview with Famitsu was published with many different people who had a hand in developing the Steam Deck. Greg Coomer was asked a question on if Half-Life Alyx was representative of the future of the franchise. Quote, "I think that's a good idea. We love that world and want to continue to explore the Half-Life universe. Half-Life Alyx was a very fun game to make. As the creators of that world, it was fun to be able to go back there and tell more of the story. There were a lot of challenges in virtual reality, and it was interesting to solve them. Half-Life productions are always accompanied by technical innovations, so it was a big step in that sense as well. To return to the original question, the short answer is yes, Half-Life Alyx is a sign that Valve has more to say about that world." On August 28th, 2022, Valve superfan and likely the person with the largest collection of Valve materials, David McGravy, had acquired dozens of art prints from a contact at Valve Software while they were moving offices in 2017. Some of these art pieces depicting Episode 3, Half-Life 3, and the cancelled Alyx and Dog game that had elements evolve into Half-Life Alyx. On March 1st, 2023, Mark Laidlaw gives an interview with Rock Paper Shotgun, calling his release of Episode 3 deranged. Quote, "I was living on an island, totally cut off from my friends and creative community of the last couple decades. I was completely out of touch and had nobody to talk me out of it. It just seemed like a fun thing to do, until I did it. Eventually, my mind would have calmed and I'd have come out the other side a lot less embarrassed. I think it caused trouble for my friends and made their lives harder. It also created the impression that if there had been an Episode 3, it would have been anything like my outline. Whereas, in fact, all the real story development can only happen in the crucible of developing the game. So what people got wasn't Episode 3 at all." Mike Moraski gave an interview in October of 2023.
And so I took those and pushed them just a little further, but used those in both the Half-Life games, game and the Portal games. And so that's what kind of ties it into the Kelly universe in a lot of ways.
What was that? Mike, I love you, but you only ever did music for Half-Life Alyx, right? In terms of Half-Life, it was just Alyx. So Deadlock goes into closed alpha in April of 2024, and the more people that get access to it, the more people can data mine the build. And it's in this build that things like the Zen Gorilla, the Zen Jellyfish, the Zen Swooper, the Feral Manhack, the Pentatank, the Off-World Workers, the Off-World Storks are all found, and the Half-Life 3 Further starts anew. On November 15th, 2024, for the 20th anniversary of Half-Life 2, Valve released a massive update to the old game and contracted out Danny O'Dwyer of NoClip fame to create a documentary about the development of that game. They were open about exactly where Episode 3 had gone, and they also seemed to be hinting towards the future.
I think like one of the things we have internally tended to attach to the Half-Life IP is innovation. Gameplay innovation is oftentimes enabled by a technological innovation. It's an interesting challenge moving forward to like think about what that means for future Half-Life stuff.
I think one of the things that was super rewarding about working on Alyx was to see that community reaction, in particular sort of what happens at the end, was something that we were much less confident in, perhaps, in terms of our ability to predict how people were going to react. And so, yeah, the reaction from people to the story and the narrative choices we made at the end have been really energizing, is probably the right term. And so we're really excited to keep going there.
I think that Half-Life represents a tool we have and promises made to customers to capitalize on innovation and opportunities to build game experiences that haven't been involved previously. And I think that there are no shortage of those opportunities facing us as an industry right now.
So I'm going to make a video about everything that you need to know, or that we know at all, about Half-Life 2 Episode 3. Now, when the episode model was first being shown to people, Valve thought that they would be able to release episodes for 4 to 6 months at a time. Now, it's been, 4 years since episode 2, and we still haven't seen episode 3. So obviously there's something going on with that model. And it is now going to be turned into a much more involved, much larger Half-Life 3. In an interview, Lombardi had said, quote, "You will see more Half-Life. Gordon Freeman's adventures are not done. I have nothing to say today, but you have to hang in there with us." For all we know, it's 20 years later, Alyx and Gordon are married and they have a kid, and you play as the kid, and the kid goes out and kills all the Combine advisors and find out that the Combine advisors is really just, you know, G-Man.
Hey, I was told I could find some Valve enjoyers here. You know that one computer from the final hours of Half-Life Alyx? This one right here? I found that. So if you want to see a video about that, there will be a link to my channel in the description, Bringus Studios. Your boy Tyler even made it into my video.